the stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of the Miles City Saloon, dust billowing around its wheels like a yellow ghost, and when the door opened, Vincent Anders saw her step down with eyes that had seen too much and a face that wore its history like war paint. She moved carefully, he noticed, as if every step cost her something. Vincent had been leaning against the hitching post outside the general store, having just finished loading supplies for the ranch, when the coach arrived that June afternoon in 1878. Montana Territory was unforgiving country, and Miles City sat on the edge of civilization where the Tongue River met the Yellowstone, a place where people came to either find themselves or lose themselves entirely. The woman who stepped down wore a traveling dress that had seen better days, dusty brown with worn edges, and she carried a single carpet bag that looked nearly as weathered as she did. What caught Vincent's attention, however, was not her modest belongings or her careful movements, but the thin white line that traced from her left temple down to her jaw, partially hidden by dark hair that had come loose from its pins during the journey. She stood for a moment, looking around Miles City with an expression Vincent could not quite read. Fear, perhaps, or resignation, or maybe just bone-deep exhaustion. She appeared to be in her early 20s, with dark brown hair and eyes that matched, and even from across the dusty street, Vincent could see her hands trembling as she gripped the handle of her bag. The stage driver tossed down a small trunk, barely looking at her as he did so. "That is everything, miss," he called out gruffly before climbing back onto his perch. The woman nodded, staring at the trunk as if wondering how she would manage both it and the bag. Vincent found his feet moving before his mind had fully decided. He crossed the rutted street in long strides, touching the brim of his hat as he approached. "Excuse me, miss. Name is Vincent Anders. Would you like some help with your trunk?" She flinched when he spoke, actually stepped back half a pace, and Vincent stopped immediately, holding his hands slightly away from his body in what he hoped was a non-threatening gesture. Up close, he could see more clearly now. The scar on her face was just one of many stories her body told. Her hands, when she adjusted her grip on the carpet bag, bore small white marks across the knuckles. The high collar of her dress did not quite hide what looked like the edge of an old burn mark at the base of her throat. "I do not need help," she said quietly, her voice rough as if from disuse or perhaps from screaming. She looked past him rather than at him, her gaze fixed somewhere over his left shoulder. "No offense intended, miss. Just that trunk looks heavy, and I was headed this direction anyway." Vincent kept his voice gentle, the same tone he used with skittish horses. "My wagon is right there. I could drop your things wherever you are staying in town." She hesitated, and he could see the war happening behind her eyes. Need versus fear. Practicality versus whatever had taught her to be so wary. "The boarding house," she finally said, so softly he almost missed it. "Mrs. Crawford's boarding house." "I know it well," Vincent said, and he did. Mrs. Crawford ran the most respectable boarding house in Miles City, a two-story building at the east end of town where single women and traveling families could find clean rooms and decent meals. "Let me just get this trunk." He bent and lifted it, surprised by how light it was. Whatever this woman was carrying in terms of baggage, most of it was not physical. When he straightened, she was watching him with those careful, guarded eyes, still clutching her carpetbag like a lifeline. "Thank you," she managed, the word seeming to cost her something. Vincent led the way to his wagon, loading the trunk into the back with ease. He had the build of a man who worked cattle for a living, tall and lean with broad shoulders, and the kind of strength that came from years of hard labor rather than brief exertion. At 26, he had been working the Anders ranch since he was old enough to sit a horse, and the land had shaped him into someone solid and dependable. "You can sit up front if you like," he offered, gesturing to the wagon seat. "It is not far, but far enough that walking would be uncomfortable in this heat." She glanced at the seat, then at him, then back at the seat. Finally, she nodded and allowed him to help her up, though she stiffened when his hand touched her elbow, even through the fabric of her sleeve. Vincent climbed up beside her, careful to leave plenty of space between them on the bench. He clicked his tongue at the horses, and the wagon rolled forward, wheels creaking slightly as they made their way down Main Street. "First time in Miles City?" he asked, keeping his eyes on the road ahead to avoid making her more uncomfortable. "Yes," she said. Then, after a pause, "I saw an advertisement for a seamstress at the dress shop." "Mrs. Patterson's place," Vincent said, nodding. "She does good work, has been looking for help for a while now." "You have experience with sewing." "I do." The woman's hands tightened on her carpet bag. "I am good with a needle." Something about the way she said it made Vincent think she had needed to be good with a needle, that it had been survival rather than pleasure that had honed that skill. He wanted to ask her name, wanted to know her story, but he could sense that pushing would only make her retreat further into herself. They rode in silence for a few moments, passing the blacksmith shop, where Tom Miller was hammering out horseshoes, sending up showers of sparks. They passed the bank, the doctor's office, the Methodist church with its white steeple reaching toward the endless Montana sky. "It is a decent town," Vincent said eventually. "Rough around the edges like anywhere out here, but there are good people. Mrs. Crawford will treat you fair. So will Mrs. Patterson, if you get the position." "Do you work for them?" the woman asked, a slight edge of suspicion in her voice. "Are you vouching for me in exchange for something?" Vincent was surprised enough that he actually turned to look at her. She was staring straight ahead, jaw set, as if bracing for confirmation of her cynicism. "No, miss," he said firmly. "I am a cattleman. I run the Anders Ranch about 5 miles west of town with my father. I do not work for anyone in Miles City, and I am not vouching for you because I do not know you. I am just making conversation and trying to be neighborly. If that makes you uncomfortable, I will be quiet." She blinked, and he saw something shift in her expression. Surprise, maybe, or confusion, as if kindness without agenda was a concept she had forgotten existed. "I apologize," she said after a moment, and she sounded like she meant it. "That was rude of me. You have been nothing but helpful. No need to apologize. I imagine you have your reasons for being cautious." They were approaching the boarding house now, a well-maintained building with a front porch and flower boxes in the windows. Mrs. Crawford clearly took pride in her establishment. Vincent pulled the wagon to a stop and set the brake before hopping down. He came around to help the woman down, and this time she accepted his hand without quite so much tension, though he could still feel her trembling slightly. He retrieved her trunk from the back of the wagon and carried it up onto the porch. The woman followed, still holding her carpet bag, and knocked on the door with a hand that shook only a little. "Mrs. Crawford opened it almost immediately, a stout woman in her 50s with gray hair pulled back in a sensible bun and eyes that missed nothing. She looked from the woman to Vincent and back again. "Mrs. Crawford," the woman said, her voice steadier now. "My name is Hannah Ashford. I sent a letter about renting a room." "Of course, dear, I remember." Mrs. Crawford's expression softened. Come in, come in. Vincent Anders, is that you helping Miss Ashford?" "Yes, madam," Vincent said, touching his hat brim. "Just gave her a ride from the stage stop. How kind of you, Mrs. Crawford opened the door wider. "Bring that trunk into the front hall, would you, Vincent?" He did as asked, setting the trunk down gently inside the doorway. The boarding house interior was as tidy as the exterior, with wallpaper featuring small blue flowers and a staircase leading up to the rooms above. "Thank you," Hannah said, finally looking directly at him for the first time. Her eyes were brown, he saw, a deep brown that reminded him of rich earth after rain. "For your help." "You are welcome, Miss Ashford." Vincent touched his hat again. "I hope you find Miles City to your liking." He left then, climbing back onto his wagon and heading toward the ranch, but he found his thoughts returning to Hannah Ashford repeatedly during the drive home. To her scars, visible and otherwise. To the fear in her eyes and the way she moved like someone expecting a blow. To the fact that she had traveled all the way to Montana Territory, alone with barely any belongings, to take a job she might not even get. Whatever had happened to Hannah Ashford, it had been bad enough that Montana seemed like a fresh start. Vincent wondered if Miles City would be kind to her, if the town would give her the peace she so clearly needed. He found himself hoping it would. The Anders Ranch spread across 1,000 acres of Montana grassland, with the big sheep mountains visible in the distance when the weather was clear. Vincent's father, Thomas Anders, had claimed the land back in 1868, just after the Civil War ended, and had built it into one of the most successful cattle operations in the territory. The ranch house was a solid structure of logs and timber, expanded over the years as the ranch prospered. Thomas was on the porch when Vincent drove the wagon up, mending a bridle with practiced hands. He looked up as his son approached, blue eyes sharp despite his 53 years. "Took you long enough," Thomas said mildly. "Thought you just went for supplies." "I did," Vincent said, starting to unload the wagon. "But I helped someone when I got into town, woman who just arrived on the stage." "That's so." Thomas set aside the bridle, interested. "Someone settling here, hoping to. She is looking for work at the dress shop." Vincent carried a sack of flour toward the house. "Her name is Hannah Ashford. She is staying at Mrs. Crawford's." Thomas helped with the unloading, and they worked together in the companionable silence that came from years of shared labor. But when they were finished and sitting on the porch with cups of coffee, Thomas brought it up again. "You seem thoughtful," he observed. "This Hannah Ashford, she make an impression." Vincent considered his words carefully. "She has scars, not just on her face, though there is one there too. All over her hands. She moves like someone who has been hurt badly, flinches at kindness." Thomas was quiet for a moment, drinking his coffee. "There are a lot of folks out here running from something," he finally said. "That is what the frontier is for sometimes, a place to start over. I know." Vincent stared out at the grassland, at the cattle grazing peacefully in the distance. "I just hope whatever she is running from does not follow her here. Not much you can do about that, son, unless she asks for help." "I know that too," Vincent said. But over the next few days, he found himself thinking about Hannah Ashford more than he should, wondering if she had gotten the position at the dress shop, if she was settling in at the boarding house, if Miles City was treating her well. He told himself it was just normal neighborly concern, the kind anyone might feel for a newcomer to town. He was not entirely convinced. It was a week before he saw her again. Vincent had come into town to pick up some equipment the blacksmith had been repairing, and he happened to glance through the window of Mrs. Patterson's dress shop as he rode past. There, seated at a table near the back, bent over what looked like a wedding dress, was Hannah. He tied his horse outside the blacksmith's and conducted his business with Tom Miller, but his eyes kept drifting to the dress shop. When he finally gave in and crossed the street, telling himself he was just being polite by checking in, the bell above the door chimed as he entered. Mrs. Patterson looked up from where she was helping a customer select fabric. She was a woman in her 40s, thin as a rail with quick hands and a keen eye for fashion. "Vincent Anders, what brings you to my shop?" Do not tell me you need a new shirt because I know your father orders those from the catalog. No, madam, Vincent said, hat in hand. Just wanted to say hello. I heard you took on some help. I did indeed. Mrs. Patterson beamed. Miss Ashford here is a miracle worker with a needle. Look at this beadwork she has been doing on the Morrison wedding dress. She gestured toward Hannah, who had looked up when Vincent entered. If she was surprised to see him, she did not show it, but he thought he saw something flicker in her eyes. Recognition, certainly. Maybe something else. Vincent stepped closer to the table, genuinely curious to see the work. The dress was beautiful, ivory silk with intricate beadwork forming patterns of flowers along the bodice and sleeves. The stitches were so tiny as to be almost invisible, the beads arranged with perfect precision. That is fine work, he said honestly. Mrs. Morrison will be pleased. Thank you, Hannah said quietly. Her voice was still soft, but there was less fear in it than there had been a week ago. She met his eyes briefly before looking back down at her work. Miss Ashford has been a blessing, Mrs. Patterson continued. I had 3 dresses backed up and she has already finished 2 of them. And she has ideas for ready-made items we could stock in the shop, things people could buy without waiting for custom work. That sounds smart, Vincent said, still looking at Hannah. She had color in her cheeks now, just a little, as if the praise embarrassed her. She wore a simple blue dress with long sleeves despite the June heat, and her hair was pulled back neatly. The scar on her face was still visible, but somehow it seemed less prominent now, or maybe he was just getting used to it. Are you settling in all right? He asked. At Mrs. Crawford's. Yes, Hannah said. She has been very kind. Everyone has been kind. She said it like it surprised her, like kindness was not something she had expected or was accustomed to. Vincent felt something twist in his chest, a combination of sympathy and anger at whatever had made her this way. I am glad to hear it, he said. If you need anything, or if anyone gives you trouble, the Anders Ranch is just 5 miles west of town. My father and we try to be good neighbors. Hannah looked at him then, really looked at him, and he saw her trying to puzzle him out. Trying to figure out what he wanted, why he was being kind. He wished he could tell her that sometimes kindness did not have a price, that not everyone would hurt her, but he knew those were words she would have to learn to believe through experience, not reassurance. Thank you, she said finally. That is generous of you. Mrs. Patterson was watching the exchange with interest, her sharp eyes moving between them like she was watching a particularly intriguing play. Vincent had known her long enough to recognize that look. She was already matchmaking in her mind, already imagining possibilities. Well, he said, stepping back and settling his hat on his head, I should let you get back to work. Just wanted to say hello. It was good to see you, Vincent, Mrs. Patterson said warmly. Do give my regards to your father. I will, madam. He touched his hat brim to both women. Miss Ashford, Mr. Anders, she replied, and then he was out the door and back in the Montana sunshine, wondering why such a brief conversation had left his heart beating faster than usual. Over the following weeks, Vincent found reasons to come into town more often than was strictly necessary. He told himself it was coincidence, that the ranch always needed something from the general store, or that he had business at the bank, or that his father had asked him to check on something at the feed store. And if he happened to pass by the dress shop each time, and if he happened to glance in the window to see if Hannah was there, well, that was just casual curiosity. He saw her sometimes on Sundays at the Methodist church, where most of Miles City gathered for services. She sat in the back, always alone, and left quickly once the sermon ended, as if afraid someone might try to engage her in conversation. Vincent noticed that while the town women were polite to her, they had not exactly welcomed her into their circles. There was a reserve in how they treated her, a slight distance, and he suspected it had to do with her scars and her obvious history. People in small towns could be kind, but they could also be wary of anything different, anything that suggested trouble or scandal. Hannah, with her carefully guarded past and her visible marks, was definitely different. It bothered him more than it should have. One Saturday in July, Vincent was in town picking up a part for the windmill when he saw Hannah coming out of the general store, carrying a basket that looked heavy. She was heading in the direction of the boarding house, walking carefully in the heat. He did not think about it. He just acted. "Miss Ashford," he called out, jogging to catch up with her. "Can I help you with that?" She stopped, turning to look at him with that same cautious expression. But there was less fear in it now, he thought. They had passed each other in town enough times, exchanged enough polite greetings that perhaps he was becoming familiar rather than threatening. "Mr. Anders," she said, "I can manage, but thank you." "I am sure you can," he agreed. "But it is hot and that basket looks heavy and my wagon is right here. Please let me give you a ride." She hesitated, then glanced up at the sun beating down mercilessly. Montana summers could be brutal, and Miles City offered little shade on its dusty streets. "All right," she said. "Thank you." Progress, Vincent thought. A week ago she would have refused outright. He took the basket from her and was proven right about its weight. She had been carrying what felt like 20 pounds of goods without complaint. He loaded it into the wagon and helped her up onto the seat, then climbed up beside her. "Mrs. Patterson has you working on Saturday?" he asked as they started toward the boarding house. "No, this is my own shopping," Hannah said. "She is very fair about working hours. 6 days a week, with Sundays off, and she closes the shop at 5 every day except Saturday when we work until 6. That is decent of her." Vincent guided the horses around a particularly deep rut in the road. "Are you enjoying the work?" "I am." There was something in Hannah's voice that had not been there before. Not quite happiness, but satisfaction maybe. Purpose. It is good to be useful, to create beautiful things instead of just mending what is broken. Vincent wondered what she had been mending before, and for whom, and under what circumstances. But he did not ask. "Mrs. Patterson is lucky to have you," he said instead. "I heard Mrs. Morrison nearly cried when she saw her wedding dress, said it was the most beautiful thing she had ever owned." Hannah smiled and it transformed her face. It was small and brief, but genuine, and Vincent felt his breath catch. She should smile more, he thought. She was beautiful when she smiled, scars and all. "I was happy with how it turned out," she said. She was a kind customer, very appreciative. They had reached the boarding house, but Vincent found himself not wanting the conversation to end. He climbed down and retrieved her basket, carrying it up to the porch. "Miss Ashford," he said as she followed him up the steps. "Would you like to come out to the ranch sometime? For supper, I mean. My father and we are not fancy cooks, but we manage decent meals, and it would be nice to have company." He saw the refusal forming on her lips before she spoke, saw her instinctively pulling back, retreating into safety. "I do not think that would be appropriate," she said carefully. "I barely know you, Mr. Anders." "You are right," he acknowledged. "But you will never know me better if we do not spend time talking. And I promise you, Miss Ashford, my intentions are entirely honorable. Just supper and conversation. My father will be there as chaperone if that makes you more comfortable. I just thought you might enjoy getting out of town, seeing a bit more of Montana." She looked at him for a long moment, and he could see her thinking, weighing, trying to decide if he was trustworthy. "Why are you being so kind to me?" she asked suddenly. "You do not know me. You do not owe me anything. So why?" Vincent considered lying, offering some easy platitude. But Hannah had clearly had enough of lies and hidden motives in her life. She deserved honesty. Because I like you, he said simply. Because I think you have been through something terrible and you deserve kindness to balance it out. Because you are new in town and probably lonely, even if you do not want to admit it. And because I find myself thinking about you more than I probably should, and I would like to get to know you better. But if that makes you uncomfortable, I will leave you alone. I promise you that. Just say the word and I will be nothing but polite and distant from here on. Hannah stared at him and he could not read her expression. Shock, maybe, or fear, or something else entirely. You are very direct, she finally said. I find it saves time and confusion, Vincent replied. So what do you say, supper at the ranch, next Sunday afternoon, perhaps? I could pick you up after church. I need to think about it, Hannah said, but there was less certainty in her refusal now, less automatic rejection. That is fair, Vincent said. You know where to find me if you decide yes, and if you decide no, well, I will understand that too. He touched his hat and headed back to his wagon, leaving her standing on the porch with her basket of goods and what he hoped was something to think about. Sunday came and went without an answer. Vincent saw Hannah at church, but she left before he could speak to her, and he did not chase her down. He had said his piece. The decision was hers. Monday brought a surprise. Vincent was in the barn mucking out stalls when his father came in with an odd expression on his face. You have a visitor, Thomas said. Miss Ashford from town. Vincent nearly dropped the pitchfork. Hannah is here. Drove herself out in a rented buggy from the livery, Thomas said, and there was approval in his voice. Thomas Anders appreciated people who took initiative. She is on the porch, said she wanted to speak with you. Vincent brushed the worst of the dirt off his clothes and headed for the house, his heart doing something complicated in his chest. Hannah stood on the porch, looking small and determined, her hands folded in front of her. Miss Ashford, he said, climbing the steps. This is a surprise. I am sorry to come unannounced, she said, but I wanted to give you my answer in person, about supper. All right, Vincent said, trying to keep his voice calm despite the fact that his pulse was racing. I would like to come, Hannah said, the words coming out in a rush as if she had to say them quickly before she lost her nerve. Next Sunday, like you suggested, if the invitation is still open. It is, Vincent said, unable to keep the smile off his face. Absolutely it is. I will pick you up after church around 2 o'clock. That would be fine. She was gripping her hands together tightly enough that her knuckles were white. But Mr. Anders, I need you to understand something. I am not looking for anything romantic. I am not ready for that. I may never be ready for that. If this is just about a free meal and conversation, then I accept. But if you are hoping for something more, I need you to know right now that I cannot give you that. Vincent understood what it cost her to say that, to be so direct about her limitations. He respected her honesty even as his heart sank a little. I hear you, he said seriously. And I promise, no expectations beyond a meal and getting to know each other. Whatever happens or does not happen after that is entirely up to you. Is that fair? That is fair, Hannah said, and some of the tension left her shoulders. Then I will see you Sunday. Sunday, Vincent confirmed. He watched her drive away in the rented buggy, handling the horse with competent ease that suggested she had driven before. When he turned back to the house, his father was standing in the doorway watching him with knowing eyes. She has been hurt badly, Thomas observed. Whatever put those scars on her, it was not an accident. I know, Vincent said. You are getting attached, Thomas continued. I can see it on your face when you talk about her, when you look at her. I know that too. Just be careful, son. Thomas's voice was gentle. Some people are too broken to be fixed, and you cannot save someone who does not want to be saved. I am not trying to save her, Vincent protested. I just want to know her. Thomas smiled sadly. I hope that is true, for both your sakes. The week crawled by with excruciating slowness. Vincent threw himself into ranch work, trying not to count the hours until Sunday, but they counted themselves anyway. He found himself planning the meal obsessively, wanting it to be good but not so fancy that it seemed like he was trying too hard. He cleaned the house more thoroughly than it had been cleaned in months, prompting an amused comment from his father about the miraculous motivating power of female company. Sunday finally arrived, hot and clear. Vincent sat through the church service, barely hearing a word of the sermon, too aware of Hannah seated in the back, too focused on what would happen after. When the service finally ended, he made his way to her quickly before his courage could fail. "Ready?" he asked. She nodded, looking nervous but resolute. "Ready." They walked to his wagon together, and he helped her up onto the seat. She was wearing a green dress today, simple but well-made, with long sleeves and a high collar as always. Her hair was pinned up neatly, and he caught a scent of lavender soap as she settled beside him. The ride to the ranch was quiet, but it was a comfortable quiet rather than an awkward one. Vincent pointed out landmarks as they went, telling her about the land and the cattle and the history of the ranch. Hannah listened with what seemed like genuine interest, asking occasional questions that showed she was actually paying attention. When they arrived at the ranch, Thomas was waiting on the porch, and he greeted Hannah with the same courtesy he would show any guest. "Miss Ashford, welcome to the Anders ranch," he said, taking her hand gently. "My son has told me you are working at Mrs. Patterson's shop." "I am, Mr. Anders," Hannah said. "She has been very kind to give me the opportunity. Vincent mentioned you do beautiful beadwork. My late wife used to do similar work. I still have some of her pieces in the house." Vincent saw Hannah's expression soften. "I would love to see them, if you would not mind showing me." "It would be my pleasure," Thomas said, and Vincent felt a rush of gratitude toward his father for making Hannah feel welcome, for not asking invasive questions or treating her like an oddity. The afternoon unfolded more easily than Vincent had dared hope. Thomas brought out his wife's beadwork, and Hannah examined it with reverent care, complimenting the craftsmanship. They talked about techniques and patterns, and Vincent saw her relax degree by degree, becoming more animated than he had seen her before. Dinner was beef roast with potatoes and carrots, simple but well prepared. Hannah ate with good appetite, another sign that she was becoming comfortable. The conversation ranged over safe topics, town news and ranch life, and the general challenges of living in Montana territory. After dinner, Vincent suggested showing Hannah around the ranch, and to his delight, she agreed. Thomas stayed behind, settling onto the porch with his pipe, giving them privacy but remaining visible as a distant chaperone. Vincent led Hannah to the barn first, introducing her to the horses. She reached out tentatively to stroke the nose of his favorite mare, a gentle chestnut named Copper. "She is beautiful," Hannah said softly. "I have not been around horses much. We had one when I was a child, but that was a long time ago. Do you miss it? Where you grew up?" Hannah was quiet for a long moment, her hand still stroking Copper's nose. "No," she finally said. "There is nothing there I miss." Vincent wanted to ask why, wanted to know her story, but he held back. She would tell him when she was ready, if she ever was. They walked to the creek that ran through the eastern part of the property, the water running clear and cold from the mountains. Cottonwood trees grew along the banks, providing shade and the rustle of leaves in the breeze. "It is peaceful here," Hannah said, looking around with something like wonder in her eyes. "So much space, so much quiet. It can be lonely sometimes," Vincent admitted, "but mostly I love it. The land, the work, the freedom of it. My father built this from nothing, and someday it will be mine to care for. That feels important, like I am part of something bigger than myself. Hannah sat down on a large rock near the water's edge, and Vincent settled beside her, careful to leave space between them. "May I ask you something?" she said after a while. "Anything. Why are you not married? You are a good man with a successful ranch." "Surely the women in Miles City have noticed that." Vincent laughed. "Oh, they have noticed. Mrs. Patterson and Mrs. Crawford and half the ladies at church have tried to set me up with various daughters and nieces over the years, but I never felt right about any of them. It always seemed like they were more interested in the ranch than in me, or they wanted some idea of what a rancher's wife should be rather than actually wanting to know who I am." "And what are you?" Hannah asked. "Who is Vincent Anders when he is not playing the part of the successful rancher?" It was a good question, and Vincent took time to consider his answer. "I am someone who loves this land but sometimes feels lonely in the middle of it. Someone who reads more than people expect, who thinks too much about things that have no practical application. Someone who wants a partner, not a decoration or a housekeeper. Someone who believes people deserve kindness even when the world has not been kind to them." He glanced at Hannah and found her watching him with an unreadable expression. "That was an honest answer," she said. "I promised you honesty. So you did." She looked back at the water, and when she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I was married before. That is where the scars came from, most of them anyway." Vincent felt everything in him go still. He had suspected something like this, but hearing it confirmed was different. "You do not have to tell me," he said gently. "I know, but I think I want to." Hannah wrapped her arms around herself despite the warmth of the day. "I was 18 when I married him. He was older, established, seemed respectable. My parents thought it was a good match, and at first it was fine. But then things changed. He became angry all the time, controlling. When I did not do exactly what he wanted, he would hurt me." Her voice was flat, reciting facts as if they had happened to someone else. Vincent recognized it as a defense mechanism, a way to tell the story without being destroyed by it. "The burn on my neck was from a fire poker. The scars on my hands from broken dishes. The one on my face from when he threw a glass at me." She touched the scar unconsciously. "There are others under my clothes, places no one sees." Vincent felt rage building in his chest, hot and fierce. "How long?" he managed to ask. 3 years. He died 4 months ago. Fell off his horse while drunk and broke his neck." There was no emotion in her voice, no grief. "I sold everything I could and left. Came west because I wanted to go as far as possible from Missouri, from the people who knew me as his wife. I wanted to be someone else. Someone new." "You did not deserve what he did to you," Vincent said, his voice rough with suppressed anger. "You know that, right? None of it was your fault." "I know that in my head," Hannah said, "but knowing it and believing it are different things. For 3 years he told me every day that I was worthless, stupid, deserving of punishment, that no one else would ever want me, that I should be grateful he tolerated me at all. And even though I know those were lies, even though he is dead and gone, I can still hear his voice sometimes. Still feel afraid. Is that why you hesitated about coming today?" "Yes. Because you have been nothing but kind, and part of me keeps waiting for the other shoe to drop, keeps expecting that you will turn cruel, that this kindness is just a trap." She finally looked at him, and her eyes were wet with unshed tears. "I am broken, Mr. Anders. I do not know if I can be fixed. I do not know if I will ever be able to trust someone enough to let them close. And it is not fair to you for me to keep accepting your friendship when I cannot give you what you probably want in return." Vincent took a careful breath, choosing his words with precision. "First, you are not broken. You are healing, which is different. Broken things cannot grow or change. You are doing both. Second, I do not want you to give me anything except what you freely choose to give. And third, I meant what I said about no expectations. If all we ever are is friends, that is enough. You are worth knowing, Hannah Ashford, scars and all." She stared at him, tears spilling over now, running down her cheeks. "Why would you say that? You barely know me." "I know enough," Vincent said. "I know you are brave enough to start over in a strange place. I know you are skilled at your work and take pride in it. I know you are honest even when honesty is hard. I know you survived something terrible and did not let it make you cruel or bitter. That is more than enough to make me want to know the rest." Hannah was crying in earnest now, silent tears that seemed to come from some deep well of grief and relief and confusion. Without thinking, Vincent reached out and took her hand, the scarred one, and held it gently. She did not pull away. They sat like that for a long time, hand in hand beside the creek, while Hannah cried and Vincent waited with the patience he had learned from years of working with animals and land, the patience that understood some things could not be rushed. Finally, she took a shaky breath and wiped her eyes with her free hand. "I am sorry," she said. "I did not mean to fall apart like that." "Do not apologize for feeling things," Vincent said. "You have earned the right to cry if you need to." She looked down at their joined hands, at his thumb stroking gently across her knuckles, tracing the small scars there. "You are not afraid of them," she said wonderingly. "My scars, they do not disgust you. Why would they?" Vincent lifted her hand and, moving slowly enough that she could pull away if she wanted, pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "They are part of your story, part of what made you who you are. They are beautiful because you are beautiful." Hannah made a small sound, halfway between a laugh and a sob. "No one has ever called me beautiful before, even before the scars." "Then everyone you knew before was an idiot," Vincent said firmly, and she actually laughed, a real laugh that lit up her whole face. They talked for another hour there by the creek, and Hannah told him more about her life, about growing up in Missouri and her marriage and her escape. Vincent listened and asked questions and made her laugh a few more times, and with each laugh, she seemed a little lighter, a little less weighed down by the past. When the sun started to sink toward the horizon, they walked back to the house. Thomas had gone inside, giving them privacy, but he emerged when he heard them approach. "I hope you enjoyed your visit, Miss Ashford," he said warmly. "I did, Mr. Anders, very much. Thank you for your hospitality." "You are welcome here any time," Thomas said, and meant it. "Vincent, you should take Miss Ashford back to town before it gets dark." The ride back to Miles City was different from the ride out. Hannah sat closer to Vincent on the wagon seat, and they talked easily about small things, the conversation flowing naturally. When they reached the boarding house, Vincent helped her down and walked her to the door. "Thank you," Hannah said, "for today, for listening, for not making me feel ashamed of my past or my fear." "Thank you for trusting me enough to tell me," Vincent replied. "Can I see you again?" "Not necessarily at the ranch. We could go for a walk or have lunch at the hotel restaurant or anything you would like." Hannah smiled, and it was becoming less rare, that smile. "I would like that. Next Sunday." "Next Sunday," Vincent agreed. He waited until she was inside before heading back to his wagon, his heart feeling strangely full. He knew they had a long way to go, knew that Hannah's healing would not be quick or easy. But for the first time, he felt like they were truly beginning something, building a foundation of trust and honesty that could maybe, someday, become something more. Summer deepened across Montana, and Vincent and Hannah fell into a pattern of Sunday visits. Sometimes they went to the ranch, where Thomas always made Hannah welcome. Sometimes they walked along the river. Sometimes they just sat in the small park near the church and talked for hours. Hannah was gradually becoming part of Miles City in a real way. Mrs. Patterson relied on her more and more at the shop, and word of her skill with a needle had spread. Women came from neighboring towns to have her do their special occasion dresses and intricate mending. She was earning enough to start saving money, building a future for herself. The other women in town were slowly warming to her as well. Mrs. Crawford had taken her under her wing like a protective mother hen, and where Mrs. Crawford led, others followed. Hannah was invited to quilting bees and church socials, and while she was still quiet and reserved, she was less fearful, less likely to flinch at unexpected kindness. Vincent watched her bloom like a flower that had been kept too long in darkness finally finding sun. She smiled more, laughed more, let herself relax in his presence to the point where sometimes she would lean against his shoulder or take his hand without prompting. But she still wore high collars and long sleeves, still carried herself with a wariness that never quite disappeared. And she still retreated when things became too intimate, pulling back if Vincent seemed to be getting too close emotionally or physically. He tried to be patient, tried to respect her boundaries. But he was falling in love with her, deeply and irrevocably, and it was getting harder to hide. August brought a heat wave that turned Miles City into a dusty oven. The creek on the Anders ranch ran lower than usual, and the cattle clustered in what little shade they could find. Vincent was working dawn to dusk, managing the herd and repairing equipment, and dealing with all the usual challenges of running a ranch during a drought. He had not seen Hannah in 2 weeks, too busy with ranch work to make it to town, except for a quick supply run on a Wednesday when he knew she would be at the shop. He missed her with an intensity that surprised him, missed her voice and her smile and the way she tilted her head when she was thinking hard about something. So when she showed up at the ranch on a Saturday afternoon in a rented buggy, he was shocked and delighted in equal measure. "Hannah," he said, striding toward her as she climbed down, "what are you doing here? Is everything all right?" "Everything is fine," she said, and she was smiling. "I just realized I had not seen you in 2 weeks and I wanted to make sure you had not forgotten about me." "Forget about you?" Vincent laughed. "That is impossible. I have thought about you every day." Hannah blushed, which she did more easily now, color rising in her cheeks. "Mrs. Patterson gave me Saturday afternoon off. It has been slow with the heat, and she said I have been working too hard. So I thought I would come see you." "I am glad you did." Vincent was acutely aware that he was sweaty and dusty from a morning of hard labor, probably smelled like horse and hay. "Sorry, I am a mess. Let me at least wash up." "You look fine," Hannah said, and there was something in her eyes that made Vincent's heart skip. "You look like yourself." Thomas emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. "Miss Ashford, good to see you. Vincent has been moping around like a lost calf with you not visiting." "Father," Vincent said, mortified, but Hannah laughed. "I missed him too," she admitted. Thomas's eyes twinkled. "Well, I am going into town for supplies, will not be back until evening. You two enjoy yourselves." He left with a speed that suggested this was a planned exit, leaving Vincent and Hannah alone at the ranch. Vincent shot a mental thanks to his father for his perceptiveness and discretion. "Want to go down to the creek?" he suggested. "It is cooler there." They walked together in comfortable silence, and Vincent noticed that Hannah was moving differently. Looser, more relaxed. When they reached the creek, she surprised him by sitting down and removing her shoes and stockings, hiking her skirts up to her knees and dipping her feet in the water. "That is wonderful," she sighed, tipping her head back to catch the breeze. Vincent sat beside her, pulling off his own boots and rolling up his pant legs to join her. The water was cold and perfect against his skin, a relief from the oppressive heat. "Vincent," Hannah said after a while, still looking at the water, "can I ask you something, always?" Do you ever think about what it would be like if we were more than friends? Vincent's heart stuttered. They had been dancing around this for months, never quite addressing the fact that they both felt something deeper than friendship, Hannah because she was afraid and Vincent because he did not want to pressure her. Yes, he said honestly. I think about it all the time. And what do you think? She turned to look at him now, her brown eyes serious and searching. I think I am in love with you, Vincent said, deciding that if Hannah could be brave enough to ask, he could be brave enough to answer honestly. I think I have been falling in love with you since the day you stepped off that stage, all guarded and scared and determined to survive anyway. I think you are the strongest, most beautiful person I have ever met. And I think that if you gave me the chance, I would spend the rest of my life making sure you never had to be afraid again. Hannah's breath caught. Vincent. But, he continued quickly, I also think you need to heal at your own pace and that you should not feel any pressure from me. If all we ever are is friends, I meant what I said, that is enough. You are enough exactly as you are. What if I want to try? Hannah whispered. What if I am still scared but I want to try anyway? Vincent reached out slowly and cupped her face in his hand, his thumb tracing the scar that ran down her cheek. Then we try. As slow as you need, with as many steps backward as it takes, and I promise you, Hannah, I will never, ever hurt you the way he did. I would rather cut off my own hand than raise it to you in anger. I know that, she said, leaning into his touch. I do know that. My brain knows it even when my fear does not. Can I kiss you? Vincent asked, his voice rough with emotion. Hannah hesitated for just a moment, then nodded. Yes. He leaned in slowly, giving her every opportunity to change her mind, and pressed his lips to hers. It was soft and gentle, nothing demanding or aggressive, just a sweet brush of mouths that tasted like possibility. When he pulled back, Hannah had her eyes closed and there were tears on her cheeks again, but she was smiling. That was my first real kiss, she said. My husband never kissed me like that, like I was something precious. Vincent felt the anger return, that familiar rage at a dead man who had hurt this woman so badly. But he pushed it down and focused on Hannah, on the present, on the fact that she had trusted him enough to let him kiss her. You are precious, he said. And I will kiss you like that every day for the rest of our lives if you will let me. Hannah opened her eyes and looked at him with such hope and fear and love all mixed together that it took his breath away. I want that, she said. I want a future with you. But Vincent, I need you to understand that I am not whole. There are things about me that are damaged. I have nightmares sometimes. I panic when people move too quickly near me. I cannot bear to be in small, dark spaces. I may never be able to be the kind of wife you deserve. You are exactly the kind of wife I deserve, Vincent said firmly. We all have our damages, Hannah. Mine might not be as visible as yours, but they are there. We will learn each other's broken places and be gentle with them. That is what love does. He kissed her again, and this time she kissed him back, her hands coming up to rest tentatively on his chest. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing hard. I love you, Hannah said, the words tumbling out like she had been holding them back for too long. I tried not to. I tried to keep my walls up, but you just kept being kind and patient and wonderful, and now I love you and I am terrified of what that means. It means you are brave, Vincent said. It means you are choosing hope over fear, and I love you too, so much it scares me sometimes. But it is a good kind of scared, the kind that means something matters enough to take risks for. They spent the rest of the afternoon by the creek, talking and kissing and planning a future that seemed suddenly, wonderfully possible. Hannah told him about her nightmares, about the triggers that sent her into panic. Vincent listened and made mental notes, determined to be the kind of partner who could help her feel safe. When the sun started to set and Thomas would be returning soon, They walked back to the house hand in hand. Hannah's shoes and stockings were still off, carried in her free hand, and there was something joyful and liberated about the way she moved. "Will you marry me?" Vincent asked suddenly, stopping halfway to the house. Hannah turned to look at him, surprised. "Right now?" "We have only just admitted we love each other. I know. And if you want to wait, we will wait. But I know what I want, and what I want is you. As my wife, my partner, my friend. I want to wake up next to you every morning and go to sleep next to you every night. I want to build a life with you here on this ranch, raise children with you if you want them, grow old with you. So yes, right now. Will you marry me, Hannah Ashford?" She looked at him for a long moment, and he could see her thinking, weighing, fighting down the fear. Then her face transformed with a smile so bright it rivaled the sunset. "Yes," she said. "Yes, Vincent Anders, I will marry you." He swept her up in his arms and spun her around, both of them laughing, and when he set her down, he kissed her again, deep and thorough and full of promise. They were still standing there, wrapped in each other's arms, when Thomas returned with the wagon. He took one look at them and grinned. "About time," was all he said. The wedding was small and simple, held in the Methodist church on a September afternoon when the Montana heat had finally broken, and the air held the first hint of autumn. Hannah wore a dress she had made herself, ivory silk with delicate beadwork that caught the light. She had chosen to leave her hair down, the dark waves falling past her shoulders, the scar on her face visible for everyone to see. Vincent stood at the altar in a new suit, watching her walk down the aisle with Thomas at her side, since she had no family of her own to give her away. She looked nervous but determined, and when she reached him and took his hands, he felt the trembling in her fingers. "I have got you," he whispered, too low for anyone else to hear. "You are safe." She squeezed his hands in response and smiled. The ceremony was brief, the words traditional. When the minister pronounced them man and wife, and told Vincent he could kiss his bride, he did so gently, mindful of the audience but still conveying all the love he felt. Hannah had worried about the wedding night, had confessed her fears to Vincent during their engagement. He had promised her that nothing would happen she did not want, that they would take things at her pace, that her comfort and safety were more important than any social expectations. When they arrived at the ranch house, which Thomas had vacated for the evening to stay at the hotel in town, Vincent carried Hannah over the threshold as tradition dictated. But then he set her down gently and stepped back, giving her space. "What do you need?" he asked simply. Hannah looked around the house that was now hers, at the simple furniture and the clean windows and the flowers Mrs. Crawford had brought over earlier. Then she looked at Vincent, her husband, and felt a rush of affection so strong it made her chest ache. "I need you to be patient with me," she said. "I want to be a proper wife to you. I want to share your bed and your life, but I am scared." "We have all the time in the world," Vincent said. "Tonight we could just sleep. Just lie next to each other and rest. That would be enough." Hannah felt something in her chest loosen, some tight knot of anxiety unraveling. "You would really be content with that?" "I would be content with anything that makes you feel safe and loved." She crossed to him then and wrapped her arms around his waist, pressing her face to his chest. He held her carefully, one hand stroking her hair, and they stood like that for a long moment. "I want to try," Hannah said, her voice muffled against his shirt. "I want to be close to you. I am just afraid I will panic or freeze or do something wrong." Vincent tilted her face up to look at him. "There is no wrong way to do this. We will figure it out together. And if you panic, we stop. If you freeze, we stop. If you want to just lie there and talk all night, that is what we do. This is about us, Hannah, not about anyone's expectations." So they went to the bedroom, and Vincent helped Hannah out of her wedding dress with gentle hands, unlacing the bodice and helping her step out of the skirts. She stood in her chemise and underthings, her arms wrapped around herself, while he removed his own jacket and shirt. She saw him notice the scars, the ones that covered her arms and shoulders and ribs, old marks from old cruelties. She waited for disgust or pity or horror. Instead, Vincent stepped close and took her hand. He lifted it to his lips and kissed the scarred knuckles, just as he had that first day by the creek. Then he moved to her wrist, kissing the white line there. Then her forearm, where a burn mark twisted the skin. "Beautiful," he murmured, and kissed her shoulder where 3 small round scars from cigarette burns marred the skin. "Beautiful," he said again, and kissed the long jagged scar that ran along her ribs from a broken bottle. Hannah was crying, silent tears streaming down her face as her new husband kissed every scar he could see, murmuring the same word over and over. "Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. How can you think that?" she finally managed to ask. "How can you look at these marks of violence and pain and call them beautiful?" "Because they are part of you," Vincent said, cupping her face in his hands. "Because you survived. Because your body healed itself and kept you alive when someone else tried to destroy you. Because every single one is proof that you are stronger than what tried to break you. How could I see them as anything but beautiful?" Hannah pulled him down into a kiss that started gentle but deepened with need and longing, and the desperate desire to replace bad memories with good ones. They made their way to the bed, and Vincent continued his slow worship of her body, kissing scars and unmarked skin with equal reverence. When Hannah finally gave herself to her husband fully, it was nothing like her first marriage had been. There was no pain, no demands, no feeling that her body was being used without her consent. There was only tenderness and patience and a joining that felt like coming home. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the dark, and Hannah realized she was not afraid. For the first time in years, she felt completely safe in the presence of another person. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" Vincent's hand was tracing lazy patterns on her back. "For being patient, for being kind, for making me feel like I was worth something more than fear and pain." "You are worth everything," Vincent said, kissing her forehead. "And I will spend every day of our lives making sure you know that." Hannah fell asleep in his arms, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she did not dream of violence or fear. She dreamed, instead of the future, of a life built on trust and love and the slow, steady work of healing. The first year of their marriage was not always easy. Hannah had nightmares that woke her screaming, and Vincent learned to wake her gently, to speak softly and wait for her to recognize where she was before trying to touch her. She had days when the weight of her past was too heavy, when she retreated into herself and could barely speak. Vincent learned to recognize those days and give her space while still making sure she knew he was there when she needed him. But there were far more good days than bad. Days when they worked side by side on the ranch, Hannah proving herself surprisingly capable with the animals and the land. Days when they rode out to check on the herd together and made love under the wide Montana sky. Days when Hannah would come home from town with stories about the dress shop and the women she was slowly learning to call friends, her face bright with laughter. Thomas had moved into a smaller cabin on the property, giving the main house to Vincent and Hannah, but he was still very much part of their lives. He treated Hannah like the daughter he had never had, teaching her the intricacies of ranch management and telling her stories about his late wife that made her feel connected to the history of the place. In the spring of their second year, Hannah discovered she was pregnant. She was terrified at first, her only experience with pregnancy having ended in a miscarriage during her first marriage, a miscarriage her husband had blamed her for and punished her for. But Vincent was overjoyed and tender, insisting she rest more and worry less. Mrs. Crawford and Mrs. Patterson rallied around her, the older women sharing advice and hand-me-down baby clothes. The women of Miles City, who had once held Hannah at arm's length, now welcomed her fully into their circle, bound by the universal experience of impending motherhood. When Hannah went into labor on a cold November night, Vincent held her hand through every contraction, whispering encouragement and refusing to leave even when the midwife suggested he wait outside as was customary. Hannah needed him there, and he needed to be there, and together they brought their son into the world. They named him James Thomas Anders, after Vincent's father and no one from Hannah's past. He was a healthy baby with a powerful set of lungs and his mother's dark eyes, and Vincent wept when he held him for the first time. "We made this," he said wonderingly. "You and I, we made a whole person." Hannah, exhausted and exhilarated, reached out to touch her son's tiny hand. "A person who will grow up knowing what love looks like, who will never wonder if he is safe or wanted or valued." "Never," Vincent agreed fiercely. "He will know every single day that he is loved beyond measure." Thomas was a doting grandfather, taking to the role with enthusiasm. He carved toys for young James and told him stories about the ranch, and taught him to recognize bird calls before he could even talk. The ranch that had once seemed too quiet now rang with the sound of a child's laughter. When James was 2, Hannah became pregnant again, and this time the fear was less. She knew what to expect, knew that her body could do this, knew that Vincent would be there every step of the way. Their daughter arrived in early spring, a tiny thing with her father's light hair and a surprisingly calm temperament. They named her Sarah Rose, and she completed their family in a way that felt perfect and right. The years passed in a blur of children growing, cattle raising, seasons changing. Miles City grew too, expanding as more settlers arrived and the railroad pushed further west. The dress shop thrived, and Hannah eventually became a partner with Mrs. Patterson, her skill and business sense proving as valuable as her needlework. Vincent expanded the ranch, buying adjacent property and increasing their herd. He was known throughout the territory as a fair dealer and a good neighbor, someone whose word was his bond. People sought his advice on everything from cattle breeding to land management, and he was elected to the territorial council, a position he took seriously. But no matter how busy they became, no matter how many demands were placed on their time, Vincent and Hannah always made space for each other. They still took rides out to the creek where they had first admitted their love. They still talked for hours about everything and nothing. They still kissed like newlyweds, even after years of marriage. Hannah's scars faded some with time, becoming thin white lines rather than angry red marks. But Vincent continued to kiss them, continued to call them beautiful, continued to treat her body with the reverence of a sacred trust. And slowly, year by year, Hannah learned to believe him, learned to see herself through his eyes, not as damaged or broken, but as strong and worthy and loved. She still had occasional nightmares, still had moments when something would trigger a memory and she would freeze or panic. But they were rarer now, and when they came, Vincent was always there, steady and patient, waiting for her to find her way back to safety. Thomas passed away peacefully in his sleep when James was 10, and Sarah was 8, surrounded by the family he had helped build. They buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch, with a view of the mountains he had loved. Hannah grieved for him deeply, this man who had accepted her without question and loved her like his own. The children grew. James proved to have his grandfather's love of the land and his father's steady temperament. Sarah inherited her mother's artistic skill and her father's business sense, a combination that suggested she would make her own unique mark on the world. When James turned 18, Vincent began teaching him the intricacies of running the ranch, preparing to hand over more responsibility. When Sarah turned 16, she announced her intention to expand the dress shop into a full clothing store with ready-made items for men as well as women. Hannah supported her, and they worked together to make it happen. Vincent and Hannah watched their children grow with pride and wonder, never quite believing that these two capable, confident young people had come from them. That they had managed to create a family built on love and trust, despite everything that had tried to prevent it. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Vincent and Hannah rode out to the creek, just the two of them, leaving the ranch in James's capable hands. It was September again, the same time of year they had married, and the air held that same hint of autumn. They sat by the water, older now, with gray streaking their hair and lines around their eyes, but still fundamentally the same people who had first admitted their love in this spot. "You ever regret it?" Vincent asked, taking Hannah's hand. "Marrying me, staying here?" Hannah looked at him in surprise. "Not for a single day. Why would you ask that?" "I just want to make sure you are happy, that you got the life you deserved." Hannah squeezed his hand, scarred knuckles against calloused palm, two sets of marks from two very different kinds of lives. "I got more than I deserved. I got you. I got our children. I got a home where I am safe and valued and loved. I got to build a life on my own terms with someone who sees all of me and loves all of me. How could I want for anything more?" "I love you," Vincent said, pulling her close. "Just as much as the day I married you. More even." "More," Hannah agreed, resting her head on his shoulder. "Because now I know all your faults and I love you anyway," Vincent laughed. "What faults? I am perfect. You snore, you leave your boots wherever you take them off. You think you are funny when you are actually just ridiculous. And yet you love me." "And yet I love you," Hannah confirmed, tilting her face up for a kiss. They kissed as the sun set over the Montana landscape, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful from the ashes of pain and fear. Years continued to pass. James married a smart, capable woman from a neighboring ranch, and they had children of their own, expanding the Anders family. Sarah married a banker from Miles City who treated her like a queen and supported her business ambitions, and they gave Hannah and Vincent two more grandchildren to spoil. The ranch continued to prosper, passing from Vincent to James as intended. The clothing store thrived, with Sarah's daughter showing interest in learning the business. The Anders name became synonymous with integrity and success in Montana, but also with kindness and generosity. Vincent and Hannah grew old together, their hair turning fully silver, their bodies slowing down with age. But their love never diminished. If anything, it deepened, becoming a bedrock certainty that sustained them through everything life brought. When they were in their 70s, grandchildren grown and running their own lives, Vincent and Hannah would sit on the porch of the ranch house in the evenings, watching the sun set over land they had worked and loved for decades. "You remember the day you arrived in Miles City?" Vincent asked one evening, taking Hannah's hand as he always did. "How could I forget? I was terrified, certain I had made a terrible mistake coming west." "Best mistake you ever made," Vincent said with a smile. "Second best," Hannah corrected. "The best was saying yes when you asked me to marry you." "I kissed your scars that night," Vincent remembered. "Our wedding night. I wanted you to know they did not make you less beautiful." "You have been kissing them ever since," Hannah said softly. "Every day in 100 different ways. Showing me that I am more than what was done to me, that I deserve love and kindness and respect." "You taught me things too," Vincent said. "About patience and courage, about the strength it takes to trust again after trust has been broken, about loving someone exactly as they are, scars and all." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun painted the sky orange and pink and purple, the colors bleeding together like a watercolor painting. "We did good, did we not?" Hannah said eventually. "With our lives, our children, our choices." "We did better than good," Vincent replied. "We did extraordinary." Hannah leaned her head on his shoulder and Vincent wrapped his arm around her, and they watched the day fade into night together. Two people who had arrived broken and built themselves whole through love and patience and unwavering commitment. When Hannah passed away in her sleep at the age of 76, peaceful and pain-free, Vincent grieved but did not despair. She had given him 53 years of love, 2 children, 7 grandchildren, and the knowledge that even the deepest wounds could heal with time and care and devotion. He lived 3 more years without her, cared for by his children and grandchildren, still active in the ranch management despite his age. When his time came, he went peacefully, sitting in his favorite chair on the porch, looking out at the land he loved. They buried him next to Hannah on the hill, where Thomas rested, 3 generations of Anders looking out over the ranch that had been built on hard work and deep love. The funeral was attended by half of Montana. It seemed, people coming from all over to pay respects to a man who had lived with integrity and kindness. James stood at the graveside with his arm around his sister, both of them gray-haired now with children and grandchildren of their own. Sarah had tears streaming down her face, but she was smiling too. "They had a good life," she said to her brother, "the kind of life that makes everything that came before worth surviving." "They loved each other right," James agreed. "From the first day to the last, that is a rare thing." The family gathered at the ranch house afterward, filling it with laughter and stories and the kind of noisy warmth that Hannah and Vincent had worked so hard to build. Pictures lined the walls, showing the progression of their lives. Hannah stepping off the stage that first day, young and scared and scarred. Hannah and Vincent on their wedding day, hope shining in their eyes. The family growing, children being born, the ranch expanding. And always, in every picture that showed them together, Vincent and Hannah were touching, hands clasped or arms around each other, physically demonstrating the connection that had sustained them. One of the great-grandchildren, a girl of 7, stood in front of a picture of Hannah, studying the visible scar on her great-grandmother's face. "Mama said Grandma Hannah had scars from bad people," the child said to her grandmother Sarah. "But Grandpa Vincent thought they were beautiful." Sarah knelt down to her granddaughter's level. "Grandpa Vincent thought Grandma Hannah was beautiful, inside and out. The scars were just part of her story, and he loved every part of her story because it made her who she was." "Even the sad parts?" the child asked. "Especially the sad parts," Sarah said, "because the sad parts made the happy parts matter more. Because she survived the sad parts and found joy anyway. That takes real strength." The child considered this, then nodded with the simple acceptance of childhood. "I think Grandma Hannah was brave." "She was," Sarah agreed, her voice thick with emotion. "The bravest person I ever knew, and Grandpa Vincent was brave too for loving her so well." The sun set over the ranch that evening, as it had done for thousands of evenings before, casting long shadows across the land. But the Anders ranch was not quiet anymore. It rang with the voices of children and grandchildren, with the laughter of a family that had been built on a foundation of hard-won love and healing. And somewhere, perhaps in whatever comes after this life, Hannah and Vincent were together still, hand in hand, scars and all, beautiful in their completeness. 2 souls who had found each other when they needed it most and built something that would last far beyond their years. The story of the woman who arrived with scars and the cowboy who kissed everyone and called them beautiful became part of Anders' family lore, passed down through generations. It became a reminder that love could heal, that kindness mattered, that people were more than their worst moments or their deepest wounds. And in Miles City, Montana, in the dress shop that bore Hannah's name and the ranch that still flew the Anders brand, her legacy lived on. Not in the scars she bore or the pain she survived, but in the life she built after, the family she raised, and the love she shared with a cowboy who saw beauty where others saw only damage. That was the real story. Not the arrival, not the scars, but what came after. The healing, the hoping, the choosing to trust and love again. The long, slow work of building a life worth living with someone who made it all worthwhile. And it was a story with a proper ending, which is to say, it was a story of beginning, of love that lasted, of wounds that healed, of two people who found each other in the vast Montana wilderness and created something beautiful from the broken pieces. The end.